you know what? 40 years ago, there were a lot of other things going on, and we want to fill in that big gap of what was going on out in the street, because what was going on out in the street also had a lot to do with music, and therein lies the line that is drawn from social activism and what was happening in the streets to what, say, Joe did at Woodstock. So from Woodstock, we then began a period where we did have some socially conscious music, but it was a very, very small number of artists. That the Rolling Stones might have sang Street Fight Man, but they weren't out there doing it. Most of the movements that evolved, whether it was the Yippies or whether it was the Weathermen or whether it was whatever, it involved music.
What advantage, if you want to call it an advantage, of that time period was that there seemed to be an agreement amongst all people of my generation that the direction the nation was going in was wrong, and that we needed to do something about it. That there was a polarization that went right down the middle of the dinner table, and you lined up on one side or the other, and most young people held our parents responsible for the mess, and then they expected us to clean it up. And we wanted to change that. So how the music fit in is that the way music and art have always fit in to the fabric of life and with humans is that we tell the stories of it. We sing the songs of what's going on in our neighborhood and with our friends and in our community. So there was a larger thing than just what the artists were doing, but it was a what's the word, zeitgeist?
Zeitgeist.
Yeah, is that the word? Mm-hmm. Bill, you're a professor. Yeah. Zeitgeist, that's the word. We had a zeitgeist going on.
My story is very different because my parents were members of the Communist Party back in the 30s and the 40s when I was born, and I grew up with left-wing music in my family on 78 records, and Bear Family made a box set of songs of the political left. It's very interesting, like 10 CDs, and I grew up with that music. Paul Robeson and Earl Robinson, and Pete Seeger and the Almanac Singers, and Woody Guthrie on 78s. And I grew up with left-wing politics. Of course, I did not blame my parents for any problems in America. They weren't communists when I was in the 60s. They left the party because they were had issues with the party and became what you would call progressives today. My mother was in Women's Strike for Peace and all that. So I grew up with that music, and I took it for granted, and I didn't really like it because the lyrics were really not very attractive, and it was propaganda music, some of it. But I also grew up with Gilbert and Sullivan, and the Gilbert and Sullivan was very socially conscious political operettas.
Joe, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Did you feel at Woodstock, when you did the Fishchair alone, that was a political statement?
I just felt like I was filling in time, and that was exactly what I was doing. And so I write a lot of different kinds of music. People tend to ignore my other kinds of music, psychedelic music, instrumentals, love songs, country western, whatever. But it was natural for me to just put political lyrics to my music. And I didn't think anything about it. But like Wayne said, when I performed political music, I performed it very carefully because one of my heroes when I was growing up was Joe Hill, who was writing music for the Wobblies, and he got shot, and Vic Tejada got shot. And you can write the wrong song in the wrong time in the wrong place and get imprisoned and shot. And I hung with the lefties, but I thought they were stupid.
What I'd like to say first is that I don't have a nostalgic bone in my body, and I think there's nothing more than depressing than a bunch of 60-year-olds kind of looking back longingly to a ship that already left the shore. So I think we mostly agree about that.
Yes, we all do.
We're living here, we're living now. I'm reminded of Zhou Enlai when he was asked in the early 60s by a French journalist what impact the French Revolution of the 1770s had on the Chinese Revolution of the 20th century. And his response was, it's too soon to tell. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, because the idea that we can look at a life or 40 years and say, oh, well, this is what it means. It's contested. It's been contested. When I was first arrested opposing the war in Vietnam, there were 39 of us arrested in Ann Arbor, borrowing tactics and strategy from the civil rights movement, sitting in at a draft board. 60 or 70% of the American people supported the war at that point. 3 years later, 60% opposed the war. What happened? Partly what happened was in the culture, without a doubt. Partly what happened was anti-war organizing. More significant than that was the Black Freedom Movement, large segments of it coming out against that illegal, insane war and condemning it. And more important possibly than that was GIs coming home and telling the truth of what they were told to do there and what they forced to do there and what they saw there. And that turned the stomachs of large numbers of the American people, and we opposed it. So in the spring of '68, when Lyndon Johnson said, I won't seek re-election, we had a huge spontaneous rally in Ann Arbor and parked out on the steps of the University of Michigan president, and we were celebratory on March 30th, I guess it was, 1968. And the president of the university came out, and he was, a president, and I was the president of SDS, so we were both presidents. And we had, dueling microphones. And I think what I said that night was something like, fuck you, you motherfucker, blah, 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 very articulate. And, and he said, congratulations, you've won a great victory. Now the war will end. And he meant it, and we believed it. And 5 days later, King was dead. And 2 months later, Kennedy was dead. And 2 months after that, Henry Kissinger crawled out from under a rock with a special plan to expand the war, but not to feel the pain inside the United States. At that point, 6,000 people a week were being murdered, and democracy failed, and the anti-war movement fractured. In my own family, I'm the middle of 5. One of us ran to Europe. One of us went to the communes. One of us went and organized in the industrial heartland. One of us joined the Democratic Party and tried to build a peace wing, and I did what I did. I don't think anybody can claim brilliance at that moment. I certainly don't. I don't think what we did was great. I don't think what we did was... But I do know this. Up until that moment, whenever we came together, we sang. And we sang because it brought us together in part. It gave us the courage to go out and march. It gave us the community to go out and do things. After that, every time we opened our mouths to sing, we screamed, and we didn't know what else to do.